truly, we are in the presence of greatness today, because why else would we call it sick? And not be out at the beach. Cool thing is, this is the first time I've got to meet Colm Tóibín, and he's one of my all-time favorite authors. If you ask me some of my all-time favorite books, I would tell you Blackwater Lightship. That was the beginning of my love affair with this man. Brooklyn, The Master, and my new favorite, The Testament of Mary, which ACT is doing. So it's in previews tonight. So this is a big, thank you for sharing this big day with us. I wanted to go on and on about all of his accomplishments, but I think we know that. So instead of listening to me ramble on and on about what a great maestro of the written word we have, please join me in welcoming Colm Tóibín.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to read two short bits from this book. Everybody, because Nora Webster's husband has died, everyone thinks they know what she should do. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but she's in the middle and she just doesn't know ever. So people invite her to their homes. I mean, she joins a gramophone society, which my mother did. My father died when I was 12, and in 1968, my mother joined a gramophone society in the town. And it was a big act of defiance because my father and his older brother didn't like classical music. I mean, they really didn't like it, and they thought it was funny. And there was a poor musician, a pianist, a wonderful man called Charles Lynch, and he used to tour Ireland. He was a hero, really, and he used to play Chopin and Liszt in halls all over Ireland. And you know, you'd have to go in Enniscorthy, where I'm from, in County Wexford, because it would be usually a fundraiser for something in the parish, and my father and his brother would spend a week or longer dreading it and talking about it, and oh my God, how long will it be, and how will we play this time, and they really lived in fear of the encore, was their main They just couldn't understand. They thought it was all finished and they'd applauded him and he had done all the bowing necessary. He would suddenly go back to the piano and play another movement from Liszt or Schubert, and they and my uncle, and it's sort of in this book, did think that all the things that happened in the town, the one that was most worthy of sort of withering comments was the Gramophone Society. And I suppose it's like a book club now, except then it was for music, and they would bring in from a car a stereo into the hotel in the town, carry it in, and then it would be somebody's choice every week of the music. And they would sit around, 12 or 15 of them silently listening to the music, and then they would go home. We don't, for example, there would be no drink involved or anything. I mean, it was just that. When my uncle thought of all the things you could do with your life. So my mother's joining that was a big move, and it was the first time, because she'd only ever gone out with my father, so this was where she would go out on her own on a Thursday evening down to the Gramophone Society. And of course, I was 12 and I sort of listened to everything everyone said. And if anything new or amusing or no matter what was being said, I would remember it. I was in a lot of trouble because 2 years later I could say, no, that woman didn't say that. What she said is this. You shouldn't have been listening to that woman at all. You should have been fed. And so, certainly, I mean, while some of this book is invented, I mean, it is a novel, there are other bits that are just straight out of what happened. For example, there was a priest, and he was in the Gramophone Society. My mother was amazed by him because he spoke about famous sopranos as though he knew them. He had a collection, a wonderful collection of records of Maria Callas, of Rita Strike, of Joan Sutherland. He would talk about Joan and as though there were people he was familiar with, and my mother and a friend of ours thought it was an extraordinary idea that he knew them so, he seemed to know them so well and loved them so much. And then there was another person in the Gramophone Society. I've changed her name, I've changed her profession, I've changed everything about her, but she'll know who she is. She things start conducting. And they would drive the others nuts because they were trying to listen to the music. And then there was somebody else, again, who's in the book and who will remain nameless, who played only German leader. You know, I mean, the whole point of the choice was that you would try and choose things that would be something for everybody. You play a small, you know, you might play maybe one German song, but then you'd play some opera arias, and you'd play piano music and cello music, and you know, you'd make your choice interesting. But this man would only play Richard Strauss, followed by Hugo Wolf, followed by Gustav Mahler, and they were living dread anyway of his choice. But they had to go, you know, you couldn't boycott somebody's choice. Anyway, but in the middle of all this, someone organises Nora to be in charge of keeping the score at a quiz. And various other things happen. In other words, it's in a small village, and they're brought to the pub, and they're really not used to this, and people keep giving them drinks, and eventually Nora and a friend of hers, or someone she barely knows but becomes a friend of hers, Phyllis, the two of them end up singing Brahms' Lullaby. And they're sort of drunk enough to decide to do it, but sober enough to do it reasonably well. And Phyllis just says to her, you know, you have a beautiful singing voice. And Nora says, no, my mother did, but I never did. And which is true, you know, that she'd inherited a voice from her mother, but she'd never used it. And but so Phyllis decides, without consulting her, that what she really needs is to join a choir. And so she arranges for her to get singing lessons, again without consulting her. And Nora realizes that if she doesn't go to this woman, you know, who's arranged to give her these free lessons so she can do an audition for the choir in Wexford Town, which is a big town for singing. Who's from Wexford? Yeah. Well, you know, it's got the opera festival, and there's a local choir, and getting into the choir, and you know, that would be all really very important. And in fact, later on in the book, I don't want to give the plot away, but Nora does an audition, and also the disaster because the pianist, you know, puts her in the wrong key, and eventually the man says, you know, you sound like that sounded like the tune the cow died on. But anyway, and other things happen in the choir. But anyway, this scene is where she arrives into this house. This woman called Laurie O'Keefe. It's all set up by Phyllis, and she's meant to take singing lessons. She pushed open the gate to the O'Keefe's house, noting how well tended the garden was, and how shiny all the windows of the old house were, and how unusual, almost grand it looked. Billy was retired now. He had owned an insurance company, or been involved in insurance, and she knew, as she knew so much about people in the town, that he went each evening at the same time for a bottle of Guinness in Hayes's in Court Street, a walking stick in his hand. As she went up the steps to the front door of the house, she remembered something that Morris, who's her husband, who died about a year earlier, had told her. Billy hated music, and he had the room where Laurie played and gave her lessons soundproofed, and he wore earplugs whenever there was a threat of music in the house. It was the sort of detail Morris enjoyed. Billy opened the door to her and immediately asked her in, holding back a Labrador dog by the collar. The hallway was wide and dark with old pictures on the wall. There was a smell of polish. Billy began to call downstairs for his wife, but as there was no reply, he shut the dog in the room on the left and walked down the creaking staircase to the basement, motioning to Nora to remain in the hall. She never hears me, he said, and seemed amused at the idea. Soon Billy O'Keefe appeared again. She says you are to come down, he said. He led her down the narrow book-lined staircase and into a small tiled hallway. He opened a door in a bright space that had clearly been added to the back of the old house. Laurie O'Keefe stood up from the piano. Now, Billy will make us tea unless you want coffee, she said, and biscuits, Billy, the nice ones I bought. She smiled at him as he closed the door. It's only a baby grand, she said, as though Nora had asked her about the piano. And of course I have another one there, just a plain old upright for the students to bang on. There was no other furniture in the room except a few old chairs. There was a rug on the floor and sheet music strewn about. The walls were painted white with prints of abstract paintings hanging at different heights. We'll have our tea in here. Laurie led her into another room, which had 2 armchairs, a stereo record player and speakers, and a case from floor to ceiling full of records. No one has any pity for a woman married to a man who is tone deaf, Laurie said. No one. Nora did not know what this meant, or if she was expected to reply. You know, there's something we have been meaning to say to you, Laurie went on. I almost wrote you a letter when we sent you the mass card, but then I thought, no, I'd say it to you when I saw you. They sat down on the armchairs. Nora looked out at the garden for a moment and then back at Laurie. We were driving down from Dublin. We'd been away, cousins and nieces and all that. And then we were driving back into the town and the traffic was stopped. I don't know how long we had to wait at Blackstoops. We thought there might have been an accident. It never struck us that there was a funeral. I don't know why. And eventually I pulled down the window and I asked someone what it was. Oh, we were very shocked when they told us. We knew Morris was sick, but we were very shocked. And Billy said how good Morris had been to his boys in school and what a great teacher he was. And we thought then that if we could do anything for you. You're very kind, Nora said. And then Phyllis said, I'm not sure my voice is up to much. Nora interrupted. There is no better way to heal yourself than singing in a choir, Laurie said. That's why God made music. I had my own troubles coming out of a convent at 50 and hardly a friend in the world. And it was the choir that got me started again. That was the one thing I had, my voice. And the piano. Although I trained first on the harpsichord, that was my first love. Billy came into the room with a tray, and this, Laurie said, pointing to Billy, I suppose will be my last. Do you mean me, Laurie? I do. But you can leave us now. We have things to talk about. Billy smiled at Nora and tiptoed out of the room. I sang for Nadia Boulanger, Laurie continued, and one thing she said was that singing is not something you do, it is something you live. Wasn't that wise? Nora nodded, doing nothing to indicate that she did not know who Nadia Boulanger was. She tried to remember the name so she could mention it to Phyllis. But I do have to get a feel for your voice before we set to work. Can you read music? Yes, I can, Nora said. Not well, mind you, but I learned years ago at school. It might be best to start with something you know. She went into the other room and came back with books of sheet music. Drink your tea and look through these and pick a song you are familiar with. I'll go into the other room and play the piano. I can't think what to play, but something that I know from memory. And maybe the sound will warm us up. And I don't have a pupil until 4, so there's plenty of time. Nora sipped the tea and put down the cup and rested her head against the back of the chair. The music Laurie was playing was too fast and cluttered, she thought. Whoever wrote it had put in too many notes. It was a virtuoso piece, and she says that Laurie was showing off and felt almost sorry for her that she would need to do this. It could hardly be what she did for relaxation. If Morris were alive now, she would delight in telling him what had happened, and he would say how right Billy O'Keefe was to have earplugs. Imagine being married to a former nun who played the piano. She could hear Morris's dry tone and the look of pure amusement on his face. She flicked through the books of sheet music. Most of them were German songs she'd never heard of, and she wondered now if Phyllis had given Laurie the impression that she knew more than she did. When she came to a book of Irish songs, they seemed all too silly and old-fashioned and stage Irish, songs that no one sang anymore. At the bottom of a pile were a few single sheets with some of Thomas Moore's Irish melodies. She looked at Believe Me of all those endearing young charms, but thought it was too stilted. Then she found The Last Rose of Summer. She began studying the notes and was humming the familiar tune when Laurie returned to the room. You found something then? Well, I found this. She handed her the sheet for The Last Rose of Summer. I had an old novice mistress from the Alsace, Laurie said, and she used to call me The Last Rose of Summer, even when I was on time. Oh, she was an old battle axe. Close to God, I suppose, but an old battle axe nonetheless. Laurie went back to the other room and sat at the piano. Nora followed her. Now this is bad for your voice. Laurie said we should do exercises to warm it up and not go straight into a song. But there's something about you now that might not be there in a while. I saw it when you came in the door. You have, wow, you have been close to the other side, haven't you? What do you mean? Don't talk now. Let me hear your voice. Let me go through the melody first. She played and then stopped. I'll go down to a lower key and see where that takes us. Laurie played, concentrating on the music, slowing the melody as she went along. I think I have it now. We really shouldn't be doing this. But your voice might never be as good as it is today. Let me play for a while again, and when I signal, you come in. She held her hands over the keys but did not touch them. The silence in the room was so intense that Nora presumed it must really be soundproofed. Nora felt uneasy, almost alarmed by the quality of the silence, by the need Laurie appeared to have for high drama. Laurie gently touched the keys, working the pedals so that a new low sound came from the piano. She played very softly and then she made a sign, and Nora, looking at the words, began, "'Tis the last rose of the summer left blooming alone." She did not know that her voice could be so deep, and whatever way Laurie was stretching out the note, she found herself moving much more slowly than she'd meant to. She'd no trouble with her breathing and no fear now of the higher notes. She felt that the piano was controlling her and pulling her along, and the pace meant that she gave each word its full weight. Because of the gaps Laurie left, she felt that she was singing into silence. She was aware of the silence as much as she was of the notes. A few times she faltered because Laurie was adding flourishes and she was unsure what to do until Laurie lifted her hand and then swiftly lowered it to indicate she was to end the lines more sharply and let the piano do the grace notes. When the song was finished, Laurie did not speak for a while. "Why didn't you train your voice?" she said eventually. "My mother was a better singer always," Nora said. "If we had got you young enough." I never liked singing, and then I got married. Did he ever hear you singing? Morris? Once or twice on holidays, but not for years. And the children? No. You kept it to yourself. You saved it up. I never thought about it. I can train you to sing for an audition, and the choir might need contraltos, they often do. But I can do nothing more for you. You've left it too late, but you don't mind that, do you? No. We can all have plenty of lives, but there are limits. You never can tell what they are. If someone had told me I'd be 70 and living in a town in Ireland with an insurance man, but here I am. And I know when we started a few minutes ago you didn't want ever to come back here, but you do now. I know you do now, and you will, won't you? I will, Nora said. And this Enniscorthy in County Wexford is in the southeast of Ireland, and it's about 10 miles from the sea. And we used to go every summer. My father was a teacher, and we used to go, we used to have long holidays. And you could rent places really cheaply along that coast, little huts or stay in farmhouses. And where we used to go is had cliffs, and there's erosion. So I mean, the Irish painter Tony O'Malley had lived in Enniscorthy in the 1940s, and it was in the late 40s, and he came back 40 years later. He had been living in Cornwall and St Ives. He did a touring retrospective in Ireland, and he was touring near the town, so he thought he'd come back, just walk around Enniscorthy. And it was only 40 years, so everyone recognised him. I mean, there was no trouble. People, I thought he had just left for a week or so. But among the people who came up to him was the daughter of the boarding house where he had stayed. And as she was going, she greeted him, talked for a bit, and then she just said to him, by the way, that suitcase you left, anytime you want to take that, it's there for you. And he went and he found that it was a suitcase filled to the brim with drawings, gouaches, watercolours that he thought he'd lost along the way in moving, because he worked in the bank, and the bank in Ireland would move you from one place to another very quickly. He didn't know, he just always thought they were gone. And they're very precise drawings of the town and the environs all around the town. But if you'd said to him, but surely the stuff off the Wexford coast you must have made up. And he would have said no, but he said no, that's not there, because it's gone, because with the erosion it's disappeared. So he did all these drawings of a hill behind Keating's, just down from Blackwater in Ballyconneger. That hill's not there, it doesn't exist. And Keating's house is gone, there's a sign it was there, you can see a wall. But every year it goes in a bit more. Houses fall in. My father's first cousin's house fell down. And in that lovely Irish way, there's a sort of euphemism, it's called going into the village. So, he went into the village, meaning his house fell. His house fell down off the Strand. And anyway, if you walk along further then, if you're going south, the next stretch, which often there's nobody on it, even in the summer, there's still a convent of the Sisters of St. John of God at Ballybaloo. And it was a big item when I was growing up. You would shout, Mammy, look, a nun! Because nuns would go there on retreat, and then they would come down in full black habits, two of them to walk along the Strand. It'd be like they'd come out of the ocean or something. Mammy, look, a nun! And as though they were going to come towards us and to cause us harm in some way. Watch out, a nun! And that's still there, the convent is still there, and there's often a little note, there's a little note every week in the local paper that it doesn't quite say it, but it implies it, that if you don't want to go to Mass, with everybody else in the parish church, there's a 9 o'clock Sunday morning Mass in Ballybaloo, where you could avoid everyone, just go to the convent. But anyway, and if you go further south, it's called Curracloe, and it's a longer strand with sand dunes, and it's so like somewhere in Normandy that it's where they shot the Normandy scenes from Saving Private Ryan. Just when it gets a bit longer, when you go south. But anyway, Nora's found a part-time job, and she's having a really terrible time because there's a woman who's her boss is bullying her, and she's found herself one morning actually almost threatening the woman with a pair of scissors. She can't believe it. She's now on the street. She's walked out in a rage, and she's on the street with a pair of scissors in her hand. And she's driven to work that morning because she was suffering from insomnia, and she fell asleep, just like an hour before she should get up, and so she was late for work. So she drove across the town, parked her car. She's an old car still, and anyway, she finds herself now in the morning, and with a pair of scissors in her hand, a car outside, and she just feels she can't go home to her own house, so she decides to drive to the Strand, to the beach, which is at the beginning of the book. She promised she'd never go back there again. Once her husband had died, she just didn't want to see it again. So anyway, she goes back. She had not expected to find a haze over the water. She sat in the car in front of the Keating's house and looked down in the direction of Rosslare, taking in the heavy milky light that lay over the Strand going towards Curracloe and Raven Point. When she got out of the car, she felt how unusually close and humid it was, as if there was thunder coming. She put on a pair of flat shoes that she kept in the car. There were no other cars in the car park. She walked carefully on the stony stretch between the grass and the river, and crossed a small wooden bridge and made her way south. In all the years, she thought, she'd never come here, even as late in the season as October. She imagined now how strange it would be in December and January, how storm-swept and wintry, and how biting the cold. There was hardly any colour. The world in front of her had been washed down. As she moved nearer to the shore, she could look at the small stones that made a rattling sound when the waves broke over them. She saw how exact the colour of each stone was, and it allowed her to forget work and stop worrying about what she would do. She could barely see ahead of her as she walked. It might have been easy to imagine that this was a place that belonged more to Morris than to her. It was the world filled with absences. There was merely the hushed sound of the water and stray cries of seabirds flying close to the surface of the calm sea. She could make out the sun as it glowed through the purple haze. It was unlikely that Morris was anywhere except buried in the graveyard where she'd left him. But nonetheless the idea lingered that if he or his spirit was anywhere in the world, then it would be here. He thought it almost natural that if his spirit were on this stretch of strand, then he would have his own concerns. Details of her life, her job, or what might happen in the future with the children, These will be matters that would seem as vague to him as the far distance did not to her. Things that would happen, things that would pass as his life had passed. It came to her again, his death. She pictured those who were there, Jim and Margaret, his brother and sister, and Sister Thomas, the nun from the convent of St. John of God, and old Father, who said special prayers, and old Father Quaid. For the last 2 days, Nora had stayed by his bedside, but he was already far away from them, so far that they might have been like shadows, people already lost to him. Maybe he could only imagine them all as vague presences, the ones he had loved. But love hardly mattered now, just as the haze here hardly mattered. Just as the haze here now meant that the line between things hardly mattered. As she reached Ballyvaloo, and the luminous great whiteness was moved down the strand by the mild wind towards Carricloe, she saw that there was a single nun walking back towards the lane that led to the retreat house of the Sisters of St. John of God. Wearing a full black habit, she walked slowly and with difficulty. Nora thought she must be one of the retired nuns who often came here on holiday or on retreat. When she was closer, she saw that the nun was Sister Thomas. Nora was surprised she was in Ballyvaloo. She had not known that she ever spent time away from her own convent in the town. She moved towards her, and when she reached her, Sister Thomas greeted her, put out her hands and took both of Nora's hands and held them. Suddenly Nora felt cold and began to shiver. She could hear a wind blowing, almost whistling in the distance, and when she looked out to sea and down at the strand, it all seemed calm. There was no sign of the haze here. You shouldn't be here on your own, Sister Thomas said. I was in Blackwater this morning to see a friend, and just a while ago she saw you fast asleep in the car, and then driving towards the strand, and she phoned me in the convent, and she was worried about you. I wanted to know what you should do, so I walked down here in case I would find you. Who saw me? I thought I would come down to the shoreline to see if you were here, Sister Thomas said quietly. I don't often leave the retreat house. Today it's more like heaven than earth down here. I saw her all right, Nora said. Someone who can't mind her own business. That is one way of putting it. Someone who's looking out for me. Sister Thomas released Nora's hands. I was not surprised to see you down here, she said. It was meant to happen, us meeting like this. This is how the Lord works. Don't tell me how the Lord works. Don't tell me that again. When Morris was dying, Sister Thomas said, I asked the Lord to make it easy for him and for you. I have no needs of my own, and I have not asked him for anything in a long time. But I asked him for that, and he denied me what I asked. There must have been a reason for saying no, and the reason is hidden from us. But I know that he is watching over you, and maybe that is why we met, so I could tell you that. He has not been watching over me. No one has been watching over me. I knew when I woke today, Sister Thomas said, and said my prayers this morning, that I was to see you. Nora was silent. So turn back now before the fog comes down so hard that you won't be able to drive home, Sister Thomas said. Go home, and the boys will be home soon. The boys will be home from school waiting for you. I can't work there anymore. She shouts at me at work. She said things today that made it impossible for me to stay. It will be all right, Sister Thomas said. It is a small town, and it will guard you. Go back to it now, and stop grieving, Nora. The time for that is over, do you hear me? I felt as I walked along here, Nora began. We all feel that on days like this, Sister Thomas interrupted, and even on other days. It is why we come here. Those who have passed on have it for shelter on their way elsewhere. It is nice to be among them on a day like this. Among them? What do you mean? We walk among them sometimes, the ones who have left us. They are filled with something that none of us knows yet. It is a mystery. She held Nora's two hands again and then released them, and then turned and walked slowly as though in pain, back towards the dunes and the lane leading to the retreat house. Nora waited to see if she would look back, but she did not. So Nora stood for a while without moving, looking out at the sea still covered in haze. And then she began to make her way along the strand towards where she'd left the car. The large scissors were on the front passenger seat beside a packet of cigarettes. She put the cigarettes in the glove compartment, but took the scissors out of the car and left them down on the gravel. for someone else to find. If anyone had any questions? Yeah, sure.
I've heard it said by one critic that the Blackwater Lightship and Brooklyn and Nora Webster are sort of a loose trilogy. Do they strike you that way? How do they?
The Blackwater Lightship and Brooklyn and Nora Webster. The problem is, I wrote it. My first novel is called The South, and it's about a Protestant family in Wexford in the years after independence. And the second novel, The Heather Blazing, is about a Catholic family in Wexford after independence. And the other way writers love saying, "Oh, I never read reviews. I'm above all that." But there's a really smart guy in England. I think you would know his work. He's John Lanchester. And he writes those wonderful books now about money, and he's written Capital. He writes about cooking. He's got a really good piece in the current New Yorker about food and his mother. And anyway, he's super smart. He was in Oxford. He's so smart. And he wrote a review and said that I had written a diptych. Now, I was so proud. I went around for ages saying, well, of course, as the author of a diptych, because I thought, a diptych. Yes, I mean, if you take the Heather Blazing, and then if you take the Blackwater Lightship, and Brooklyn, and Nora Webster, you get the same landscape. You get some of the same names of people, incidental people and people at the centre. And you get that journey that goes from Enniscorthy to the Wexford coast, that coast I've just described there, maybe to Wexford town, which is another 10 miles south, and perhaps to Dublin for special occasions. And you get the same sort of class in a way, the sort of lower middle class, and you get a sort of constant, which if you're from Wexford, you'll know this idea of, because people know everybody, people could say to me, you're the image of your grandfather. But I mean, I remember my sister was in a supermarket in the town, and this is about 20 years ago, but my grandfather had died in 1936. And someone said to her, "You're the image of Tom O'Rourke, do you know that?" And this was like 40 years later. That whole idea of continuity, of when James Joyce in Ulysses was asked, what's a nation? A nation is the same people in the same place. And he said, well, in that case, we're a nation. A lot of people are a nation, so that whole idea of a sort of intact community is in those books. The problem with it being a trilogy is there'll probably be another one to come, so that'll be 5. So there'll be maybe how many did Proust do? That'd be great, wouldn't it? You could say, no, I'm actually writing a Proustian. Proustian, roman fleuve, but yes, a trilogy, or with one more and maybe 2 more, operating as a sort of group of books. Yeah.
So the Testament of Mary, where does that come in? This landscape, and where did you come up with this idea? And what have people said? It's our book club book for this week. We're discussing it tonight, and I know they're going to ask me.
Well, I mean, it comes out of a few things, and I suppose the first one would be the sort of Catholicism that I was brought up with, which would be very close in a way to Polish Catholicism or some of Spanish Catholicism, where somehow or other Mary becomes the figure of intercession. That if you pray, you pray to Mary, because she might have a word with God the Father. I've never heard of anyone praying directly to God the Father. No one ever prayed to the Holy Ghost in my memory. And maybe to saints, but Mary had a special place because she had been the suffering, grieving mother, and now she was Queen of Heaven. And she became, strangely Queen of Poland or Queen of Ireland as well. And we would say the Rosary every night, and it would be, there would be 10 Hail Marys repeated 5 times, ending with the Hail Holy Queen, which is the prayer to her, to Salve Regina, to thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears, followed by the Memorare, which was considered a very powerful prayer. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who implored thy aid or sought thy intercession was left unaided. So that idea of her being at the centre of Catholicism, in the same way perhaps within the Reformed churches of of Jesus being at the centre, that Mary was at the centre, certainly of Irish Catholicism. The second thing then was that I was giving a course in the New School in New York in 2000. And it was for creative writing students. It was a reading course. The problem was that if not enough students turned up for your course, it was competitive. Like your course would be cancelled. I hadn't liked the idea of that, at all. I was trying to think what to call the course. That would make maybe, a lot of the students was that beginning of Brooklyn hipster. The East Village was clearing out, and they were all going over to Williamsburg, and they were super cool, these students. And I better become cool myself. So I called the course Relentlessness. I think that'd be a good title. And by God, I got them all. They were great. They were wonderful. And among the texts we looked at were Medea, Electra, and Antigone, and in translation. And it meant that we were looking at the idea of voice, of what powerlessness can do to a voice. For example, in Antigone, Creon's voice has no flavour, it has no texture, because he's so much power. He's a civil authority. The civil authority speaks in the language of legislation. Antigone, when she appears on the stage, from the very moment she appears, she has an aura, and her speech is filled with flavour. And that idea interested me because I saw how it had been used by, say, poets like Sylvia Plath in our time, or a poet like Louise Glück, where they had found this tone and worked with it. And I'd seen productions of these plays where this voice really mattered to an audience. And the other thing then is that if you just Google it before you go to the event tonight, in Venice there are, I suppose one of the most beautiful paintings of Mary is Titian's painting of the Assumption, that Our Lady was assumed body and soul into heaven. And over the altar in the Friary is Titian's painting of the crowd watching as she rises, and her robes are all red, and all around her angels, and above is the sky, and above the sky is God waiting for her. This is sort of the apotheosis of Marian devotion. And just about 5 minutes walk away up the street to the left, you can see that Tintoretto just thought all this was too much. All it was too glorious. Was there anything he could do to, mess up all this easy imagery of adoration? And he made a long painting, really long, of the crucifixion, which is in a back room of the building. And it really shows his thing, how untidy it might have been on that day. Like there's a cross at the middle, but all around people are cooking and talking, and they have horses, and there's loads of other things going on the same day, as though on that day many people did not know what it meant. How could they? It was such a strange idea. And so certainly that idea of looking at the human part of that story, taking it out of its religious context, and pretending 20 years, I wonder if she'd lived, because no one knows, if she lived 20 more years, what would she have said as an older woman about what occurred? What would it have looked like from her side? And it might have looked from her side, entirely human, entirely as she remembered it. Just before Christianity began to make its way into the world, she saw the story as entirely personal, as the mother of a suicide bomber might, as the mother of somebody who had sacrificed, who was asked to sacrifice a single life for a larger cause, saying, well, actually, it's my son, could you, because you just, for me it's personal, for you it's political. So I started to think about this, and so it comes out of that idea of grafting a Greek voice, one of those women, Medea or Electra or Antigone, onto that story and seeing where it would take me. So
the play is extraordinary.
Oh, have you seen it?
Yes.
Have you seen it in San Francisco?
Yes, I have.
Oh, I was there last night.
I was there last week.
She's really got an extraordinary part, isn't she?
I went backstage.
All right.
And actually, I'm going to write her a note because she'll be here till November 23rd. I thought she might like to have a cup of tea with me. Because sometimes somebody comes to an area and they don't have that much to do.
Yeah. Well, she's probably free all day, but she said, there was a this is in the ACT Theatre, American Conservative Theatre,
I
in San
recommend it
Francisco.
highly to everybody in the room. Yeah,
You saw it too, did you?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a young woman behind me, however, who was so disturbed by the crucifixion description that she left. And her two friends apologized to me. I said, "Oh, you don't need to apologize to me."
No, it's hard.
But I said, it's not just about Mary, it's Abu Ghraib, it's the Holocaust, it's the mother who asked ISIS not to kill, behead their son. It's sort of everywhere.
Afghanistan, Syria, it's everything. Northern Ireland, it's all that. Well, thanks very much for going to it. That's great. Yes?
The Master is such a different world.
Yes, it doesn't fit into the trilogy.
Of course, you pick your topics the way you pick topics, but how did you get to the inside in?
I suppose I had read all the novels, and I mean, in the funny way that literature works, where aged 18 or 19, I had a summer job at home, and I picked up Portrait of a Lady to start to read it for no reason. And I became fascinated by the style, and then by the story, and then by the idea that somehow or other he was writing about control or treachery. He was writing about much larger things than you thought. And then I went and read more or less everything over the next few years that he wrote, but I couldn't find him in the books. In the same way as you could find George Eliot, in Middlemarch, or you could find James Joyce in Ulysses. You can't find Henry James. He's absent from the books. And this is deliberate, he wanted to be absent. He believed in that idea of mastery, of artistry, of keeping away from the books, of believing the page is not a mirror, it is blank to be filled. And it was only later when I had to write something about him that I began to, I know what happened. I was in Yaddo, the writers' retreat in upstate New York, and I was trying to finish the Blackwater Lightship. And I realized that I could really only work a few hours a day, but to keep me out of harm's way, I really should read a book, but it should be a boring, big book, And I went into the library in Yaddo and I found it, Leonie Dell's, it's a 4 volumes or 5 volume biography of Henry James, and I thought, this has to be the most boring book. I mean, since he didn't fight any wars, or, he didn't, his house didn't go on fire or anything. Like, I'd just take this to my room, and it would keep me, busy or unbusy, just keep me going, but it would bore me, and therefore I'll go back to my own work. And of course, I found it fascinating, the story, and the ambiguities within James. You can never pin him down. He's neither English nor American. He loved his family, but he kept away from them. He was probably homosexual, but he really liked women. His social life was enormously rich in London, but he kept writing letters saying he wanted to be alone. You could never find him. And that began to interest me, the idea that no matter what occurred, James was somehow or other moving between 2 points, and you could never really find an exact place for him. In other words, he's mysterious. And out of that, I began to work. And so the Master came. I mean, I knew the work already, so I picked the years between 1895 and 1900, which seemed like years of great failure for him. He had a big disaster in the theatre. I mean, it was a big disaster in the theatre in January 1895. And his play, Guy Donville, which we don't hear about anymore, it's been performed, was replaced by a new play by a writer called Oscar Wilde, called The Importance of Being Earnest, using the same actors, the same money, the same manager, the same investors, same theatre. James was taken off in this new play, which is, has lasted forever. And of course it led to Wilde's downfall, because Wilde had now 2 plays in London and he just couldn't settle, And James, of course, with his disaster, was just sent home. And for the next 5 years, if you look, the only thing that he wrote that we still really read carefully is The Child of Screw. I mean, okay, he wrote What Maisie Knew, but that's not really one of the great books. But then once after 1900, in 3 years, 1 year each, he wrote The Ambassadors, The Wings of the Dove, The Golden Bow. He's now what age is he? He's born in 43, so he's he's in his 60s. Sorry, he's in his late 50s. In 3 years, living in Rye alone in Lamb House, he writes these 3 books. But that's no use to me. What I'm looking at is the 5 years before that, when almost some of those images are coming to him. But what's coming to him also is failure. What's coming to him also is memory and regret. So there are almost 5 years when not much happens artistically. And I could sort of work with that, rather than the years of pure industry or total success. So I could work with that.
It's a good.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Yes?
Seems like in the passage that you read today about the woman who had a cruel boss. And in Brooklyn, there's a lot of cruelty of women towards other younger women when they're, especially in an employment situation or a landlady situation. Is that something that you think about a lot?
Yeah, I mean, in that summer job I'm talking about, I worked in the motor taxation office of Wexford County Council. It was before computers, so every car in the county had to have a file. And they felt some of the files had gone missing. And they thought the best thing to do was get the student to go through every file, pulling them all down to make sure they're all in order. Of course, this was so boring, I couldn't do it at all. I spent my time sitting around making phone calls, or making coffee for everybody, or making jokes about the boss, or just being missing. Well, she realized eventually that she would have to, really pounce on me, to get me to do this work. So she spent her time coming in behind things and looking and saying, I've never worked. It was my second job. The first job was in a strawberry factory, where the same thing happened, where I just couldn't be bothered putting big loads of strawberries onto the belt. Just making sure that there's enough strawberries for everybody. And of course, the factory would basically have to close down because I wouldn't have done this. There'd be no strawberries coming down. And Miss Williamson would come running down the factory saying, "The belt! There are no strawberries on the belt," and it would be, of course, all due to me, because I was the beginning of I was just, get up. I would be in the bathroom smoking, so, I mean, they're just 2 of my experiences, personal experiences of working for, often for women who are probably under great pressure themselves to deliver. I mean, in other words, if it became known that the student in the motor taxation office was sitting around making jokes all day, the boss would in turn be told, well, you're obviously not up to managing people. But but I would go home in the evening and tell my family, well, what did she say to you today? And I said, she just stood for an hour behind me without moving while I said, she said, "Don't speak. Just fine," I would go on like that. So I just found all that incredibly useful when it came to. I mean, one of the problems in a way with writing is that you don't go out to work every day, and so you don't get to know all those things that other people experience so fiercely. So a few of those good summer jobs, you get a lifetime out of them. In the film of Brooklyn, which is coming in September, there's a friend of mine who is made for the part of the bossy woman called Nettles Kelly. Like I've known this actress. She's an Irish actress called Breed Brennan. She has a sort of mean look and nastiness built up in years. And she's a terribly nice woman personally, but they cast her in the part, and by God does she enjoy it. She had a wonderful time. Just so there was someone at the back.
Do you go back to Enniscorthy?
Yeah. I built a house in the times when you could get money from the bank in Ireland, before they all decided that they couldn't. I mean, it was really funny because the banks would just, they would write to you to say, would you like a loan of money? And, before, when I was trying to buy a house in Dublin, they said, what about writer's block? And, we can't really be sure that you could go on writing. I said, what about banker's block? We don't have block. And we're all, And when it came to the boom, they just said, well, they wrote to me to say, would you like a loan of money? And I just wrote back, said, yes, I would. So I took a fistfuls of money and I went down and I found a site, and it was the exact place I wanted, and overlooking the sea, just there in that bit I read. So I wrote a lot of this book there. So I was looking at it all. So the things I'm able to tell you about masses at 9 o'clock in Ballylough, I know all that. I'm there whenever I can. It'll be a while now, but I'll be there for Christmas, and it's beautiful at Christmas. But the time when it's most beautiful is around the middle of June or the longest day, because, well, you know this, because there's almost no night. Like at midnight, you can still see glimmer of light, and then the sun comes up over the sea. Over the sea by about 3:45, the sun is coming up, and it's really extraordinary. And then, it's also beautiful, by the way, in September, because the blackberries come, and all the ditches are just blackberries, and people go along, not as much as they used to, but they still go along with saucepans and collecting all the blackberries.
I'd like to ask you, this is off topic, it's not your work, but how do you read the play Medea? Because I saw the London performance on the big screen here, and I was so stunned by it that I'm trying to understand it in some way.
Well, I suppose the first thing about Medea is that he set out to shock. In other words, that I would imagine it's slightly like Tintoretto and Titian, where there were a lot of plays going on, and he realized that if I don't have something, they're all sleeping with their killing their killing their father to sleep with their mother. That was going on a lot. They did this plays, and like every type of thing was going on. And people were always going to be buried alive, and he said, "Oh my God, there's one they haven't, there's one no one has done yet. What if I get her to, do all the things she does?" Then, in other words, they were shocking each other, the playwrights almost. And so he got Medea to kill her. I don't want to give the plot away, but to kill her children, sort of poison robes around her husband. And in that production, is that the Fiona Shaw one? Yeah, she did Testament of Mary in New York, but she comes out looking really pleased, as though she's done something really interesting, as though she's just cooked something wonderful. After she just killed her, she does an extraordinary moment where she just comes out on the stage as though like everyone should be delighted with her. Well, the audience was really stunned, as you know about it. So it was, but sometimes you realize that it's one of the problems of writing books is there's so many other ones, and you think, well, should I put something really horrible into this book? Should I have a big fire or some massive mass drowning of people or something in the middle of the book for no reason? It's a big temptation sometimes, and you've got to not do it. Well, in the case of Medea, he did do it.
Time for one more?
Mary, taking the nuns in the Church of God
Sorry, again?
I want to tell you how I might respond to these group of women I'm running with tonight about the response to the play and the book, and actually reading the book, about this, your imagination of how this might have been. How would I respond to the nuns of
Jane.
John of God that you speak of?
I suppose the first thing to say is that faith wasn't always there. It wasn't as though in one single second everyone came to believe in the Christian message. Some people did and some didn't. Some did later. Some didn't at all. I mean, it was a time where things were changing. The second thing is that in order for there to be faith, which a lot of people have, there has to be doubt. There can't be merely faith. And anyone who lives in faith knows there's a time when you live in doubt. And that faith almost grows out of doubt rather than just coming on its own. And the possibility has to be allowed that in those years, in that 50 to 100 year period, people were wavering, moving in every direction as the Roman Empire was moving in, as old beliefs were fading, as new ones were emerging, that some people came quickly to faith, and some people didn't. And what are the possibilities? We have no evidence, because there's nothing in the New Testament to tell us. What did his mother actually feel about the crucifixion? There's nothing. I mean, the Pietà, the business of her holding him afterwards, that's not in the New Testament. It came later in the iconography, because people wanted this idea that she would eventually hold his body. So we have to explore these things. And also, I think, even if you think, well, maybe a theologian might explore them in a different way, but I'm not a theologian. I'm a writer, and my job is to try and imagine a character and try and give her a voice and make that voice credible for the reader and dramatic for the reader. And this may not fit in with people's beliefs, or with what people think writers should be doing. But those battles were fought 500 years ago in the Enlightenment, or 400 years ago. Or, the right for example, painters to be able to depict Mary, or the Christian story in whatever way they wanted. But later on, the right of novelists and poets and playwrights to put on whatever it was that came into their minds as aspects, as central aspects in a way of a free society. So this is one of the gifts we have from our other freedoms, is the freedom to imagine, and the freedom to publish, and the freedom to read. They seem to me absolutely essential freedoms. But there's also, of course, the freedom. The great thing about a book is it's closed. You don't have to open it. And with the Mary book, it's pretty clear, really, that it's not a religious tract. So therefore, some people have the absolute right, if they want, to leave it closed. But we must have the right, if we want, to open it. It's essential to the way we live and to any idea of a proper society. And indeed, the very places where you can't open a book you want are places where many other freedoms are denied to us as well. So that's what I would say.